All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started here this morning. I'm woefully out of sorts here. I told you last week about how I broke my printer, and then I did nothing about that this week. Surprise, surprise. And so I'm running around here with different things. I had the privilege to go do some teaching at Ohio Northern University this past week. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to record this. So I had I had the similar setup with this. And then the way that it works is I have a microphone that I wear that has a battery in it, but then there's an adapter that plugs into the iPad that has a battery in it. And I apparently didn't turn the thing off and the battery died. So as I was getting set up here this morning, I realized I have a dead battery. So tip of the cap to Trace and Steve for helping me get what I need to do. We've got a lot to get through this week. This is it's a fun lesson. It's an important lesson. Hopefully you learn something from it as we get into it. So just a couple of things, a little bit out of order this morning. I want to talk logistics with you early on. And from a logistics standpoint, about a month from now, there is it's March, I think it's the 12th, maybe. There's a Sunday in March, it's like the 12th, 11th, 13th, something like that. I will not be here. So I just wanted to give you fair warning for that. Also, I think is there a youth breakfast or next week? And as a general rule, whenever we have some event like that, I don't have class. That way we can stay back there. You can eat all you want, help pick up, and then go. But I don't like making people just hurry to get through that to come listen to me, because there's a lot of good things that can happen outside of me. I know that. I know what I provide, right? I know there's me, and I know there's bacon, right? And there's a little bit of a difference between. So right now, I be prepared that there is no class next week. I'll try to have maybe I'll do a little mini lesson or something like that, but do not feel obligated to be here next week whenever there's youth breakfast. So I will defer to them. Let's get into core values. So we have core values on the board here. Let's rattle these off and go from there. Who's got a core value for us this morning? Bible, prayer, relevancy, community, outreach, service, stewardship, and worship. And we said in any particular group, we have core values, and our core value in this group is timeliness. To the 6 people that showed up since I started writing these on the board, I won't make eye contact with any of you. I'll just look down or look up. Last week, I also asked that you just have some consideration, because I thought perhaps we should add another core value to this group, right? I think there's something that this group maybe has in common, something that we value as a group, so I wanted to just articulate that, and that was potentially the core value of growth. And I don't know if anybody has dwelled on that over the course of the last several days, but right now I have it with a couple of question marks, but anybody think that should go to at least a period? I'm getting thumbs up. Is there anybody opposed? Is there anybody that says, I come here with the expressed intent to not grow? No, so we don't have that. So I think it's safe to say that this is a new value or an articulated value for us, right? And then we always say that Jesus had a core value, and Jesus always valued people. And this is part of what we are going to focus in on today. For a long time, we have put this core value on the board. Jesus values people. And today we're going to look at a leadership law that describes this. And the thing is we're going to link this and this together with what we are going to learn today. Now, when a lot of people think of service, I would suggest that it becomes easy for us to get a little bit sideways. It becomes easy for us to get a little bit confused about that because we may take the word service and we may link that to servant or slave or something like that. And I don't know what comes to mind when you think of servant, but I know what comes to mind in my household. What comes to mind in my household are castles and manors in England. That's what comes to mind in my household because we have to watch these wonderful shows like Downton Abbey and The Crown, right? And there's this whole separate class of people that live inside these other buildings and blah, blah, blah. And they have wonderful accents and they still have the same problems that you have, the same problems that I have. But we do see them as a separate class of people from a different group of characters in those particular shows. And so as I was preparing for this yesterday, I actually pulled up my notes. I pulled up my notes from whenever I taught this a couple of years ago, and I found that I was writing, I used an illustration about servers in a restaurant. Does anybody like to go out to dinner? Anybody like to not cook? Like, there's a lot of hands that would go up for that, right? And, as you think about the server in the restaurant, there's an awful lot of them, and they're not paid well, right? Their basic wage is not much, that they make the majority of their income off of tips, right? That's how that goes. And, but I also got to thinking about it, how servers in a restaurant have a very unique and important leadership role. Have you ever thought about that? You see, this is how weird I am. I think about the leadership that servers in a restaurant provide. Remember, what's our definition of leaders? Leaders are people who help others get from where they are to a better place. When you go into a restaurant, you go in there, you have a problem, right? You go in there and the problem is you're hungry, right? And the server is going to help you go from where you are to a better place. And I got to thinking about how last summer I had the opportunity to go to one of the best steakhouses I've ever been to. Now, you all know many of my vices. You don't know them all, but I got a few vices. The ones in the food category, are Coca-Cola, Ruffles potato chips, and cinnamon rolls. Just as an aside, I ran out of Ruffles potato chips. I've been out of them for several days, which is really a shock because I usually run with about a 10 bag buffer.
You laugh.
No, it's like, when you watch and I made this deal with myself a while ago that I would only buy Ruffles when they're on sale, right? So I look when Giant Eagle has them on sale or Tops has them on sale. I'm like, okay, now I'm allowed to buy them. But whenever I go in and it's buy 2 bags, get 2 bags free, you know how many bags I buy? I buy at least 8, if not 12. The 12 I sort of feel a little bad about myself doing because I'm like, people are going to look at me funny. The 4 I figure is sort of like, well, that's what normal people do, but like the 8 is pushing at 12. I'm like, at that point the cashier's going to say, well, you having a party this weekend? I'm like, no, these are for me, So, yes, yeah, we have a whole setup. We got a whole setup, and so I ran out of Ruffles, and last night was the red and white dance. And so I had to take my girls down to the red and white dance, and I was like, I need some Ruffles. And so I went over to Dollar General, and I have never seen Dollar General busier than I did last night at 7 o'clock. Like every parking spot there was filled. So I turned around and I left. I didn't even go in. I thought, ain't nobody got time for this. But went home, and then when it was time to go pick them, whenever I got home, I had to just look on the phone and say, okay, they are open till 10. I'll just leave a little early and go back down.
This is all new information to me. I did not know this. I did notice there were
Yes. And a half eat.
You went back?
I went back at 9:30. I went in, had the store to myself. Couldn't figure out what the price of Ruffles were, so I didn't know if they were on sale or not. So I said, well, I should probably buy 2 bags, because if there's any type of sale, you'll probably have to buy 2 at Dollar General, right? So that's what I did. I bought 2 bags of Ruffles last night. So I like Coca-Cola, I like my Ruffles, and I like cinnamon rolls. But I will tell you that if I had to there's something else that goes on this list, and it is a good steak, right? A good steak will go ahead of cinnamon rolls. A good steak will actually go ahead of Ruffles. If you said, Jess, you can never have one of these things again, I would give up Ruffles for steak. I would keep steak on my life. I would give up cinnamon rolls for steak, because that's what apple pie is for, right? I would just migrate one vice for another. I don't know what would come if it came down to if I had another steak or if I had a Coke. I don't know where it would. Don't put me in that situation. But last summer I had the opportunity to go to this really nice steakhouse, and we had just an amazing server. And I can tell you that server's name. I still remember his name. His name's Brandon. You remember Brandon? And he came out. And he made me so hungry for things on the menu that I didn't even know what they were. Like, I didn't even know that I could possibly be interested in this. He sold me a $27 dessert. We never get dessert. We never. Huh? It was in Florida. It was, I'll take, if you, yeah, I mean, it was.
It was the Yachtsman's?
The Yachtsman's. I'll tell you what, I have found somebody doing his bit on, somebody took a video of him on Instagram, and if I can figure out how to do it, I'll share it for those of you that are on Instagram and care. But they had this, I don't know, it was like this cake, but there were like 17 layers to it. And there was a layer that had strawberries or cherries, and another layer that had peanut butter, and like all this different stuff. And they bring it out and they slice it down and they open it all up. And like, I was like, I could not buy this dessert. And what did this guy do? What did Brandon do? He led me from where I was to a better place. A much better place, right? And I got to thinking about this. If you told me you can go back to the Yachtsman Steakhouse today, I'd be there. But I also got to thinking about this. What if I found out that Brandon was serving at McDonald's in Meadville? And I thought, I may just have to go. I may just have, now I couldn't even tell you the last time I was at McDonald's. I cannot tell you the last time I went to McDonald's or anything. It was easily pre-pandemic. I know I haven't really traveled much since then, but I know I have avoided McDonald's for that. But I thought if Brandon was serving, he'd probably talk me into it. Is it Shamrock Shake time yet? I'm sure he would talk me into a Shamrock Shake and a supersized fry. And he'd probably say, would you like a hot apple pie with that? And I would be like, yes, I would. Yes, I would. People are drawn to others that serve sacrificially. People are not repelled by people who serve. And I share that just as an example for our leadership law of this week. And our law for this week, hey, look at that. I'm way far behind time-wise. Be prepared for me to violate core value timeliness. The law of addition. And the law of addition says leaders add value by serving people. Leaders add value by serving people. Now, this doesn't come as much of a surprise to you because there are all sorts of stories about this in Scripture. So the first one I'm going to ask you to turn to is to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 20. We're going to look at verses 25 through 28. Matthew 20, 25 through 28. Jesus called them, the disciples, together and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Jesus was teaching his disciples to be servants. Now, go out on a limb with me here. They didn't get it. This is something that they didn't quite get, because if you turn ahead a few pages, I'm going to ask you to turn to the Gospel of Mark chapter 9. Gospel of Mark chapter 9, we're going to go to verse 33. Now, the story goes, they came to Capernaum. When he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" Jesus asking his disciples, what were you arguing about on the road? But they kept quiet, because on the way they had argued about who was the greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, "Anyone who wants to serve, who wants to be first, must be the very last and the servant of all." He took a little child whom he placed among them. Taking the child in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever becomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me." Now, Jesus is going to go on and he's going to do some teaching, right? So from verses 38 on to about chapter 10, verse 12, he's doing some teaching. And when Jesus teaches, you know what happens? People listen. They're paying attention. And a crowd's forming around him. And so Jesus had just told his disciples, you have to serve. You have to help people, right? Now I want you to pay attention to what happens here at verse 13. It says, people were bringing little children to Jesus for him to place his hands on them, but, remember, whenever we see the word but, that means we're going to go in a completely different direction. People were saying, Jesus, I have my child needs to be served, and you know what? But the disciples rebuked them. They didn't get it. Verse 14, when Jesus saw this, he was indignant. He said to his disciples, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. Truly I tell you, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it." And he took the children in his arms, placed his hands on them, and blessed them. There's a couple of key things we need to pick out of this little bit of scripture that we've looked at. And one of which is that, I'll point you back to verse 35. Jesus says, anyone who wants to be first must be very last and the servant of all. The leadership lesson that we can pull from this, that to be a greater leader, we must be a greater servant. To be a greater leader, we must be a greater servant. Now, if we look ahead to verse 40, actually 39 and 40. So, any of you I realize they're all canceled now, so you may be embarrassed to raise your hand, but does anybody like the old Bugs Bunny cartoons? Wasn't that okay, some of you are offended, I'm sorry, that was not my intent. But, is there anything better than rabbit season, duck season? I don't know if you knew this, but there's three different cartoons that are that have this rabbit season, duck season thing in it. And one of the best parts of it is as they as Bugs and Daffy are starting to have this little this little conflict, Bugs changes the pronouns. And there's a gag in there where something happens and Daffy says, aha, pronoun trouble. Funny, funny, funny line, right? But I want you to pay attention to the pronouns in verses 39 and 40. Jesus said, do not stop him, for no one who does a miracle in my name can in the next moment say anything bad about me. For whoever is not against us, I lost my place, is for us. There's something very important to recognize about leaders. And leaders include others when they serve. Did you see the pronoun went from me to us? It went from, this is Mark 9 verses 39 and 40. I probably should have read that the first time. Verse 41, truly I tell you, anyone who gives you a cup of water in my name because you belong to the Messiah will certainly not lose their reward. Chapter 9, verse 41, truly I tell you, anyone who gives you a cup of water in my name because you belong to the Messiah will certainly not lose their reward. Any service will be rewarded. When we serve, there will be a reward. Now, what that reward looks like, it's hard to say. Now, it's interesting because the crowd comes and Jesus is doing this teaching. The crowd comes all around, and the disciples get worked up about crowd control. They're like, oh my goodness, there's too many people, right? And they're trying to push people away. And they're like, please, Jesus, just touch my kid. Pray for my kid. And they're trying to turn him away. And Jesus tells us, in chapter 10, verses 13 through 16, he said, servant leaders must become childlike. We must express humility. We must express wonder, honor, innocence, trust, and dependence, just like a child. Now, sometimes, you would think the disciples would start to get it, right? They've been taught a couple of times now. There's this really public illustration and teaching that Jesus does to them in front of this crowd, but they don't quite get it. We're going to go to John chapter 13 next, if you want to turn ahead. But this is a story that I would imagine most of you are familiar with, but it's about feet washing. And in the time, that was a very common custom. You're out there, you're in your sandals, you're walking around, your feet get dirty, you come in. It was not uncommon to have somebody wash your feet. But now we get to this setting, the setting of the Last Supper, and the disciples get there with dirty feet. And you know what? There's nobody there to wash their feet. And not one of them says, you know what? Let me wash everybody's feet. That's not what happens. Let's go to John chapter 13. Verses 1 through 17. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Jesus replied, You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand. No, said Peter, you shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered, unless I wash you, you have no part with me. Then Lord, Simon Peter replied, not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well. Jesus answered, those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you. For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said, not everyone was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I have done for you? He asked them. You are calling me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should wash one another's feet. I have set you as an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. If you do them. When you serve people, you add value to people. And Jesus added value to his disciples. As followers of Christ, we should be motivated to love and serve others. As followers of Christ, we should possess a security that allows us to serve others. As followers of Christ, we should initiate servant leadership to others. Don't miss this. As followers of Christ, we should receive servant leadership from others. Don't miss the lesson that Peter was taught here. There's many of us that like to serve, but somehow we get uncomfortable when people offer to serve us. We must serve and allow ourselves to be served. We are to serve Christ and he serves us. And notice how Peter, he didn't want to be served at first. That's a tough one. I think that in this little list I have, that's a tough one. It's easy to say, hey, how can I help you? But when people say, well, how can I help you? It's like, well, please look at me. What help could I possibly need? Right? You know, that's a joke. You're all supposed to laugh at that. You can all tell I need a lot of help, right? You know. As followers of Christ, we want nothing to hinder people's relationships with God. We want to help clear that path, right? As followers of Christ, we want to teach servanthood by our example. And as followers of Christ, we will live a blessed life. Now, it's one thing to serve, but serving is not always easy. Has anybody ever had tough times in their life? This is an IQ test, right? We've all had. How many of you had tough times this week? We probably all have, right? You know, there's times when things get tough. Now, I want to draw your attention to the Gospel of Matthew chapter 14. Matthew 14. Now, if you go to verse 1, and if you're in a Bible that has headers, Matthew chapter 14 says, John the Baptist beheaded. We're going to skip over the gory part of this at the beginning. I'm going to take you to verse 11. We're going to look at 11, 12, 13, and 14. But just understand this. John the Baptist had been held in prison, and through a series of events, somebody says, hey, I think it'd be a really good idea if John the Baptist's head was served on a platter, and that's what happens. That's what happens. So let's go to verse 11. His head, John's head, was brought in on a platter and given to the girl, who carried it to her mother. Verse 12. John's disciples came and took his body and buried it. Then they went and told Jesus. Verse 13. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now you can read this, and you can just read this very mechanically. But I want you to read this with a little bit of emotion. I want you to see this story with some emotion, because what is the relationship between Jesus and John the Baptist? John came before, but John was his cousin, right? John is his cousin, right? Jesus had a special relationship with his cousin. And then when the news of John's death came, what do you think? Would it be unexpected for Jesus to want to grieve? Would it be unexpected for Jesus to want to mourn? Would it be unexpected for Jesus to say, you know what? I need just a little bit of time to myself. Think of this as if this was you, if this was a close cousin of yours. Would you want some of that space? Scripture tells us that he did, right? It said when Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat, what? Privately. He said, I need a little bit of space here. This is understanding Jesus as fully God, fully man, right? This is understanding Jesus as fully man, right? He withdrew to a boat, or he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. He just needed a little bit of space. Now keep in mind, Jesus is the greatest leader of all time. People will follow him. So now when the boat comes ashore, the crowds had followed him on foot. Like, there goes Jesus in a boat. Well, we'll follow him, right? Can you imagine that? Can you imagine, people just, you drive away in a car and people still follow you on foot? And that's just spectacular, right? The crowd follows him. Why does the crowd follow him? Because they have needs. They need to go from where they are to a better place. They need to go from where they are to a better place. Jesus helps people go from where they are to a better place. They have needs. And when Jesus gets off the boat, verse 14, when Jesus landed, he saw a large crowd. Do not miss the next words. Do not miss. He had compassion on them and healed their sick. Scripture records that Jesus had compassion for them. Jesus still valued them, even though he was going through a tough time, right? He focused on adding value to other people. And I think there's an important lesson here that perhaps there's something that I can learn, maybe it's something that you can learn as well. One of the greatest remedies for our own suffering is to serve others. One of the greatest remedies to our own suffering is to serve others. Now, how many of us have problems? How many of us have a lot of problems? How many would raise a foot? I mean, that's how many problems you got, right? We've got problems, right? We all do. Yet, I'm a firm believer that if we were to write our problems down, we wouldn't really want to trade them. I wouldn't say, these are my problems, what are your problems? If we compared notes, we probably wouldn't trade. You would say, Jess, you really had a problem last night where you didn't have enough potato chips. And I'd be like, yeah, it was serious, right? You would say, oh my goodness. Maybe you would trade for that ridiculous problem. I don't know. But some of you would be like, that's not even worth the time of day, right? Servant leadership becomes a solution for both the one serving and the one being served. Now, sometimes serving is obvious. You can see something that obviously needs to be taken care of. The disciples should have seen that there was the opportunity to wash some feet. But men, I need to talk to you right now. I'm not going to make eye contact with Steve, but I'm with you, Steve. We're here, right? We're just not going to look at each other for this. Has there ever been a time when you did not know what your wife wanted? All the time. Like all the time, right? I'm sorry? You can't read minds, right? You know? So let me ask you this. What if you don't know how to serve someone? What do you do? Ask. Perfect. Ask. Very simple. You say, how can I serve you? How can I help you? Now, there's a couple interesting stories in Scripture. I would point you to Luke chapter 18. Luke 18, we're just going to look at verse 41. Jesus is going along. There's a blind man. When the blind man comes to Jesus, Jesus says this to the blind man. Now, this may seem absurd. Somebody brings a blind man for you, and brings a blind man in front of you, and you say to him, "What do you want me to do for you?" You think it was real surprising whenever he said, "Lord, I want to see." Jesus does that because he wants us to become clear on what we want. We need to be clear. You think Jesus didn't know that a blind man wanted to see? You really think that? Turn back a few pages, Matthew chapter 20, verse 32. There's two blind men in this story. Verse 32, it says, Jesus stopped and called them. He says, "What do you want me to do for you?" To no one's surprise, they answer, "Lord, we want our sight." Sometime we need to ask people, because there's a lot of people that don't know what they want. Men, is there times you've actually done something for your wife and they didn't appreciate it? Like they didn't even notice that you did it? They didn't notice that I put away the bag of potato chips last night and just didn't leave them on the couch? Like they didn't notice that you put the toilet seat down? Like, there's times we do some very thoughtful things, right? But here's a simple life hack. You may not have taken a note today. If this is the only note you take today, this is the most practical thing I can give you. Conclude your conversations by asking how you can best help someone. Whenever it's all said and done, just say, "Hey, how can I serve you? Is there anything else I can help you with?" I will tell you that will differentiate you between most other people. How can I help you? What else can I help you with? Now, I came across a piece, I read a book on ancient Jewish wisdom, which was just fascinating. It was really a study of the Old Testament and a number of the different principles that came from them. But one of the phrases that I picked up from that book is this one. It goes, "We care more about the people we serve than we care more about the people we take care of than the people who take care of us." Think about that. We care more about the people we take care of than those people care about us. And if you think about this in the terms of parenting, this is like parenting 101. This is what makes the world go round, right? As a parent, we're always taking care of our kids, and our kids don't really take care of us. But if we think about it, we probably don't take as good a care of our own parents as we try to take care of our kids. It's what propels us into the future. Like, if we had kids and we said, "Well, got a new kid, but I need to take care of my parents," and we just neglected the kid, everything would sort of fall apart real quick. But the reality of it is that we care more about the people we take care of than the people who take care of us. you know what? There's no limit on the number of people you can take care of. There's no limit. It's interesting that we can take this principle and it works swimmingly in our own household. We see it at work in our own household, but when we walk outside the doors, we forget about it. And maybe I'm just telling stories on myself here. Maybe I'm the only one that forgets about that when I walk out the door. But there's a good opportunity here. Leadership is not about how far we can advance. Leadership is all about how far we can help others advance. And so as leaders, we must ask ourselves this question: am I making things better or worse for the people who follow me? Adding value to people doesn't just happen. You must be intentional about adding value to people. You must see what they need and help them clear the path. Going back to my server, I would call him my server friend. He wouldn't even know who I am. But my server friend, Brandon, he cleared the path for me to have probably one of the 3 best meals I've ever had in my life. And I'd be hard pressed to tell you what the other 2 are. But like it was up there. It was fantastic, right? How can you intentionally add value to people? To some, it may just be a word of encouragement. It may just be that little, hey, you can do it. That may be, I'm thinking about you. Some people, it may be some special instruction. It may be, hey, have you ever thought about doing it this way? I see you're struggling with this. Maybe I can show you a different way to do it. Maybe it'll be providing a particular tool or resource, right? You say, well, here, try this. Maybe this will help you. You know, you're going out there to fish and you don't have a hook on the end of your fishing line. It may be hard to catch a fish. Give them a tool. Help them catch that fish, right? It may simply be taking the time to listen. Adding value to people changes lives. And we add value to others when we truly value them, when we make ourselves more valuable to them. That's a variation of what we looked at back in our first week, the law of the lid. There's something that we have to do. If we want to be able to add value to people, we must continually add value to ourselves. We need to be improving, or else you'll get to the point where you can't add value to people. You need to keep progressing. Other ways that you can value people is you need to know what they value, right? I see Brother John hiding in the back. And if you want to value John, you got to take him something Cleveland Browns related. If you took him something Pittsburgh Steelers related, he wouldn't value that, right? You've got to know them. You got to know what they need. Now, that's a very simplistic example, but you need to know what others value. This was a tremendous life hack for me with my son. Now, when my son was very young, he was into the Thomas Train stuff. I had no idea what Thomas Train stuff was, but I'll tell you what, he was into it. And whenever I found out that he was into it and I learned more about it and I started asking him questions about it, I was able to build a much closer relationship. We add value to others when we do the things that God values. What are the things that God values? I have a large handful of just applications for us for the law of addition. Number 1, put others ahead of your agenda. We all have things to do. They're all urgent, right? You know, there's all sorts of things that need to be done. We take that time and we add value to somebody else, that's going to mean so much. When we add value to ourselves, it's going to allow us to have the confidence and it's going to give us the security to add value to others. Some of us don't step out because we haven't added to ourselves. Some of us are scared to share the good news of Jesus Christ because we're not real comfortable with that ourselves. So you don't share it with somebody else. A way to practice the law of addition is just to to look for a need, and when you see the need, take the initiative. See the need, provide a solution to it. You can perform small acts anonymously, right? You can do those little things that can make life better for folks. This is one that I struggle with, but I would say that I've improved on it. I would not tell you that I'm even close to being good on it. But the advice is to learn to walk slowly through the crowd. I used to think there was a prize to be the first one out of this building on a Sunday morning. There isn't. I tried. I looked for it. I was like, hey, you know what? My name was on the back corner seat for a number of years. That's where it was. And as soon as we were done, if I could get, and way back in the day, a few of you remember when Pastor Simmons was here, he would do a prayer, but when he was doing the prayer, he would actually walk to the back and he would give the dismissal from the back double doors. That way he could shake your hand as you went out the door. And I thought, if only I could be fast enough that I could beat him out of here before he had to shake my hand. Right? Some of you might remember that. But when you take the time and you go slowly through the crowd, say hi, interact with people. I do a lot more of that now than I did 10 years ago. I do a lot more of that now than I did 2 years ago. Some of you may say, I do a lot more of that now than I did 2 weeks ago, but let's just stop the illustration there, right? But learn to walk slowly through the crowd. Connect with people. You'll see that they have needs. You'll be able to pick up on those. Begin your day reflecting on the love you have for others in your life. Advice I was given, which I'm not good at taking, but I'll share it with you because I think it has a lot of value. Before you have a conversation with anybody, remind yourself, this is a person that I love. Now, you may not know this person yet, but it's helpful to remind yourself of this because don't ever lose sight that God took the time to intentionally make that person. And because God took the time to intentionally make that person deserves our love and respect. And they may have become ornery and nasty or whatever, but that gives you the opportunity to treat them as you can treat them with the hands and feet of Jesus Christ. Last tip I would give you for applying the law of addition is to develop a bias for action. There's so many things that we see that need some attention. There's so many ways that we could add value, but sometimes we say, oh, I'm reasonably sure somebody better than me could do that, right? Right? That's one of those. There's a lot of times that we become hesitant, especially when you get into a crowd the size of the church we have. We say, oh, you know what, surely somebody else could do that. Surely somebody else would be much more talented, would have much more skill, would have much more experience doing that than what I would. Let me encourage you, take that action. Take that action. I went to the basketball game Friday night. First basketball game I've been to in a number of years. Now, what's interesting about the game of basketball, it's not just the players on the court, but there's people on the bench. When we came home, my daughters they've never heard the glory stories of when I played basketball. And so I went and I pulled out some basketball clippings and I'm going through it, and I found a couple of really bad articles where it said the Cardinals were outscored, or the Cardinals bench was outscored 22-0 in this loss to fill in the blank. And I thought, you need to have a bench. This church needs a bench. We need a deep bench. There's the opportunity for every one of us to serve. There's the opportunity for every one of us to add value to someone, somewhere, sometime, somehow. And we can help people go from where they are to a better place. That's the law of addition. Leaders add value by serving people. I am probably way over on time today. Yes, I am. So I will just give you this. Based on what you have learned today, what action will you take? What change will you make? And is there anything that you learned today that you can teach to somebody else for your sake and theirs? Because when you do that, it's going to make this lesson stick that much more for you. So that's where I will conclude today.